Okay, so well, let's get started slowly. So thanks very much for joining. This is actually my first time playing with GitHub Copilot. So I'm not a pro who's been using it since it came out. Actually, not at all. But I thought it was important to talk about it because we're really in the age of generative AI and in the age where these things are really becoming important. So I wanted to look at it, get started, give a little intro, and see how things go. So you can click on the little slide button on the side to get started with the slides. So the goal of this webinar is really to talk about AI-powered programming in general, but I will focus on GitHub Copilot because that's the first really popular tool that came out. And I had to start somewhere. So first of all, let's talk about things a little bit more generally. Of course, a year and something ago, the first ChatGPT came out, and so that really launched for the public at large the age of generative AI. Those models have been around for a while, but by becoming available to everyone, they've really transformed the face of AI at the societal level. And generative AI applies to images through all those natural language, meaning human language, to picture generator, to the large language models that will output some natural language, but also to coding. And so based on ChatGPT, the GPT-3, which is, of course, the OpenAI big model that is behind ChatGPT, there is an OpenAI model called Codex, and that's the one that runs Copilot. That's the one that allows Copilot to do its generation. And so GitHub Copilot is really just a large language model, but applied to code. And now you can see that any big company out there is coming out with very similar products. Microsoft has IntelliCode for its Visual Studio IDE. Amazon has Code Whisperer. There's Tab9. There's very many out there. And these things are neither free nor open source. They are often subscription based. And their goal is really for productivity. And actually, it does seem to work because the data out there shows that code developers, programmers, website designers, people do code a lot faster with these tools than they do without. So definitely, they are enhancing productivity. Now, all of these tools are very similar, I would say, with, of course, different results, and they run on different models, but they're really productivity tools. They're there to help you. Some of them call them coding assistant or pair programmer. The idea is to have auto-completion, code generation as you type to make you go faster. One tool that is very different and really stands out is AlphaCode 2 from Google DeepMind. It's, of course, the successor of AlphaCode. It's based on the large language model Gemini Pro, actually, of Google DeepMind. And I say model, but it's actually many different models playing together. And this is a very different product, fully unavailable to the public at this point, and absolutely not open source either. It might get integrated into Gemini or some product at some point, but right now, we can only take Google's word for it for what it can do. But it's actually a very impressive tool because instead of playing in a very narrow field like Copilot and the other tools out there, it's really create full codes to solve some problems. And so the way they've trained it is using a lot of competitive program. And when AlphaCode 2 participates in those competitions, it reaches the 85th percentile, which is a huge improvement from AlphaCode 1, which was at the midway point, about the median compared to the competition out there. And, and when I say competition, I mean human competition. And if you have an interaction between humans and AlphaCode 2, they can even reach the 90th percentile. So if you help AlphaCode 2, you can get even better result. And I have a biology background, so the way I'm thinking about it is not exactly conventional, but I find it incredibly interesting as an approach from a biology perspective, because to me, this is really taking the idea of evolution by natural selection. Because the way this works is that they produce an incredibly large number of code samples, and that would be the equivalent in the biological realm of random mutations. So the vast majority of these samples, of course, are going to be garbage, in the same way that the vast majority of mutations out there are deleterious. But then, and they actually really try to create as much diversity in the code as possible through all sorts of mechanisms. And you have multiple models creating all of those samples. But then you have a huge filtering and scoring process that allows to group, filter, sample through the whole realm of options, rank, select, etc., amongst all of those models to get the best subset. And that, of course, would be the equivalent of the selection part in biology. And so the concept is fairly simple, but insanely powerful, because as we know, natural selection, even though it's a very basic and simple mechanism, has led to incredible things. And so this, I think, is really life transformative. And I think that we will see very novel approaches in the world of coding, that novel things that people have never thought about. I think it's going to revolutionize not just programming, but the world at large, because in the same way that AlphaGo came up with all sorts of win the game of Go through strategies that no human had ever thought of, I think that AlphaCode will at some point come up with totally novel code that no human has thought of. So this is totally not something we can use, but just know that it's out there, and I think it's actually the most fascinating tool out there. But today I'll focus on the world of codecs, which is much more narrow. It's maybe not as transformative in terms of the future of society or the future of humanity, but it's what people use. It's having large effects because of increase in productivity. Maybe some people, maybe like Alex and I, will lose their job eventually due to that. We just don't know. So it's still exciting and maybe scary, but it's more narrow. So now I am a huge open source advocate, and I normally only ever teach open source tools. And so free and open source software is really something I care about deeply. And today I'm going to give a webinar on something that is neither free nor open source, and I had a bit of issues about that. So what about the free part of things? You have to train those models, so there's a lot of GPU runtime there. And then those models that are very large and that require a lot of computing power, not just to train, but even to use, they're most conveniently used as cloud-based services, stuff that runs on a server. So the fact that these things are not free, I think it's fairly reasonable, because you're paying for a cloud service, and they are, which is fantastic and cheers me up. some self-hosted options that are popping up. A very promising one is Tabby. Another one is called Copilot, but I think that Tabby, which is written in Rust instead of Python, has more potential. And it has very many developers, it's actively developed, and it has very good results. So you can run your own free and open source tool on your own server, or maybe even your own machine if your machine has enough RAM, memory, and computing power. But it's just not very practical for a lot of people to run your own server or your own stuff locally. So paying for a cloud service, I think, is fair. Now, the open source part, I think, is a bit more annoying because the reason these things exist is because they are training on all of the open source code that is out there. And then those models and those products themselves are not open source. Of course, the open source community with tools such as Copilot or Tabby are providing open source tools, but the one I'm going to talk about today is not open source, and I really wanted to rant a little bit about that. So, GitHub Copilot, what is it? So it's cloud hosted, it's run on a server, which I think is convenient, okay? It's an AI programming assistant. So it's in that first category of tools I talked about that are there to make your life easier, increase your productivity, do some code completion, but it's not gonna like solve problem out of the blue, producing totally novel code. You can think of it as an evolution from your very primitive code completion that IDEs and text editors started to have, to then you have those server code completion systems that emerge with, for instance, Microsoft LSP, like the Language Server Protocol, which allows you to not have all of those auto-completion things run on your machine, but on a server so that you can have much more auto-completion for many more languages conveniently through a server. Now, this is the same kind of spirit, but moving this one step further, because instead of having just the options of the arguments of a certain function being completed, you have an LLM that's based on all of the kind of code that it has seen following some kind of code is going to predict what comes next. It's developed by GitHub. So GitHub nowadays is owned by Microsoft. And it is based on that OpenAI Codex model based from GPT-3. So you need a subscription to access it. So it's a monthly or yearly subscription. And you can add it to either your individual GitHub account or your organization GitHub account. And if you have an organization GitHub account, then there's a lot of administration tool that allow you to see who in your organization can have access to it, and it's a fairly sophisticated. But if you're a student or a teacher, or if you have a number of open source projects on GitHub that have a number of stars, then you can have free access. For instance, as an instructor, I have free access to it. And so I expect that most of your students, and so you should be able fairly easily to have access to it. Now, just like LLMs, just like generative AIs, there are safety concerns, and because coding has its own power and strength, of course, there are things that you're responsible for whatever code you're generating. There is no guarantee, of course, of safety or quality. This is just some statistical auto-completion of based on what's out there, and out there, there's a lot of excellent code, but there's a lot of erroneous code. There's a lot of outdated code, and so what you're going to get might not be what you want. So of course, don't blindly trust the code you get. This is just generative AI for you, right? Also, just like all other generative AI nowadays, there are some lawsuits and legal things on the way, because these things have exploded over the past year and a half at an incredible speed, and the legal systems in countries haven't had a chance to keep up. And so we're in some kind of gray area where we don't know where things are going to go in terms of policies, regulations, and all that. And for instance, GitHub, the Codex model has been trained on all of those open source projects out there on GitHub and on the web. And a lot of them come with some copyleft licenses that state that you can do whatever you want with the code if you maintain the copyleft license. And Codex is absolutely not open source. And so there are some licenses violation there, which have led to some, to at least this lawsuit, and I'm sure there must be other. So that's an ongoing work in progress, let's say, on the legal front. As far as languages that are supported, both the natural, by natural, I mean human languages, and the programming languages, well, it's all based on the data that's out there. So languages like Python that are flooding the internet, of course, will have more suggestions and higher quality suggestion than languages that are very obscure. Like in Chapel, for instance, that Alex teaches, it might not work tremendously well, although to be tested, but I suspect that's not a ton of training data. On the other hand, the little training data that's out there is probably of very good quality, and so maybe the autocompletion wouldn't appear very often, but they might be of better quality. There are some people who have looked at the quality of the results, for instance, and they have found that in Julia, which is a fairly niche language, the auto-completion, I mean, the accuracy of the suggestions are a lot better than in R. But the whole of the Julia, like the whole language and all of the packages, everything is on GitHub. And people who write Julia are usually very good programmers. And so there is a fair amount of Julia data on GitHub, and it's good quality. And so even though Julia is not doesn't have a huge source base, community base, it works actually very well with GitHub Copilot. And so now, okay, let's get our hands on it. How do we use it? So you can either start by typing some code, and then it's going to suggest a bunch of auto-completions. So that's that progression I was talking about. It's kind of like LSP, like Language Server Protocol, but much better, because LSP is only going to suggest the arguments within the function, while this can suggest an entire function, an entire code snippet, like much more than what you would get. Okay. But more fun, you can actually get some code from comments. So you can describe what you want your code to do in a comment, and then either trigger Copilot or wait for the auto-completion to kick in by itself, depending on your settings. And you're going to have a bunch of suggestions, and you can cycle through the suggestions. So it's actually pretty cool. And I will demo it later so that you can see that it actually works pretty astonishingly well. And yeah, it's very easy. You can accept part of the suggestion, like word by word or line by line, or the entire suggestion, or you can see the various suggestions. It's yes, it is indeed an excellent productivity tool. Now, what interface do you actually need to use it? So that's the other thing that is, I think, really amazing and super convenient, is that it works as an extension to text editors and IDEs. So initially, it was for VS Code and Visual Studio, because again, GitHub now is owned by Microsoft, and VS Code and Visual Studio, those are Microsoft IDEs and text editors, which are extremely powerful and great. And so that's how it started. But some plugins and extensions are being added to an increasing number of tools. And in my demos, for instance, I will use Emacs, and you will see that it works fantastically well in Emacs. And so, yeah, it will work in a lot of IDEs and text editors, hopefully in the one you're familiar with. So how do you set it up? Right, well, so the difference with ChatGPT is that ChatGPT isn't code specific. It's been trained on the entire internet, and so it can produce some code. And obviously, they both run a GPT based model. ChatGPT now is at GPT-4. This still runs on GPT-3. So this is not going to do as well to answer some human questions about the universe, but it's really super convenient that in your text editor, as you type your function, you have like direct autocomplete the way you would have for like your regular autocomplete in RStudio or etc. Without having to go to your browser, type in the chat, get the answers, copy paste. I also find it a lot faster. I find that ChatGPT has quite a bit of lag to provide answers, and this is like really like much faster. So I cannot tell you whether the suggestions are better. I haven't tested that, and these things are constantly evolving as models are getting better anyway. But I would say that it's way more convenient, and it integrates into a coding workflow way more easily, and I find it faster. So I really don't see the point of having a ChatGPT window and copying back and forth while there is this thing that is so convenient. That said, if you don't have access to a free account, if you don't fall into the instructor, student, open source star category, yeah, you can use ChatGPT to get some of your code generation. So to get started, so you need to go to your GitHub account page and then click on your little icon and then go into your settings. And you will see that there is a Copilot section. And this is how you're going to set things up. And this is where either you're going to have to provide your free access if you've applied to it and received it, or a payment method. And then there are a few settings you can play with. So that gives you access to Copilot. But now you have to set it up into whatever IDE you want to use it through. So for VS Code, there is an extension. And then once you have it installed, there are a number of preset key bindings that allows you to cycle through suggestions, escape, reject, etc. And it's very straightforward to use. Right, absolutely, yes, yeah. And I will demo that at the end in the command line. Yeah, the command line Copilot in particular is fantastic to explain command. Yeah. So the command line version of Copilot that I will talk at the end, and that is still in beta, has been trained on data up to 2021. So the data is pretty outdated, and so it is not being trained on new data at this point. At least the version that is out there hasn't been trained in new data for a while. And the codex that runs on the not the CLI Copilot, but the regular Copilot it doesn't say until when the data was collected for the training. So it's probably much more recent than 2021, but it is still running on GPT-3. So I suspect that there will be a new release at some point that will be using GPT-4, that will have been trained on more data, that will be more like maybe a bigger model, etc. But be aware that some of the stuff could totally be outdated. And if you use it to figure out code to link through some APIs, for instance, you can find old answers. So yeah, that can be a problem, of course. So yeah, Nick, so to access to your free or free account, you have to apply through some interface, and you have to answer a few questions. And I can't remember how it works, but it was a fairly straightforward thing, and I got access like within a day or two. So yeah, if you Google it, you should be able to find the info pretty easily. But so yes, you won't get free access through the UBC organization, for instance, or the in your case. So for me, like, I'm not part of the SFU organization or any such thing. You cannot download them, but they will remain there, so you can bookmark them and trust that they will remain there. Okay, so for Vim or NeoVim, you need Node.js, and you can clone the Copilot Vim extension, and then you can set it up, enable it, get some help, and use it in Vim pretty easily. And then in Emacs, you also need Node.js, and there is at the end a link to the package. It's based on the NeoVim binaries that have been adapted to Emacs. So it's not an official plugin, but it works fantastically well. And to install it, you need the package editor config. And then if you have the straight package, you can install it with this, and then you can set up your configurations depending on whether you want auto-completion to kick in automatically. You can set your own key bindings, etc., etc. And then in all of those IDEs or text editors, you will have to connect to your account. So with Emacs, you run MX Copilot login. With NeoVim, it's Copilot setup or enable, like one of those two. Like, you will have to enter your credentials for GitHub so that it gets linked with your GitHub account that has, either for free or for a paid service, access to the service. And then you're connected to the server, and you have to log in a single time and enter your credentials a single time, and then it just runs, and you, as long as you have internet access, you can just use it. Now, I have never tried it. I don't know, actually. I haven't heard of any plugin for Jupyter. In all of the documentation I have read, there was VS Code, Visual Studio, Emacs, etc., Vim, but I have never heard anything about Jupyter, so I suspect it does not. But considering how popular Jupyter notebooks are, I would imagine that it will be built or developed. It will come up at some point, but I have never read anything about it, and I don't use Jupyter myself. So, but I don't think that it is available at this point. So that's GitHub Copilot, and I will do all the demo at the end because I want to make sure that I have enough time to run through everything. So yeah, Google again as Code Whisperer. No, Google. Well, no, Google. No, Code Whisperer. That's Amazon. Google. Yeah, I don't know if what. So they have, of course, AlphaCode for the this new category of real problem solving model, but for the convenience, day-to-day time-saving, I can't find the word, they may have a product as well. Yeah, Collab probably has something, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So anyway, so that's GitHub Copilot, and it allows you to create some CSS, HTML, Python, Julia, R, you name it, in your text editor. Or some, you can create some APIs or create some, CSS buttons, whatever. So that's in any programming language. But there is also in beta, Copilot in the CLI. Yes, and the suggestions, I'm reading the questions, are based on the context, absolutely. Yeah, I will do some demo, but yeah. It definitely takes care of the context in answering the questions. It looks at what's in your script, what's in the project, etc. Absolutely. So what is Copilot in the command line? So similarly, so if you have access to GitHub Copilot, you have access to it. This is a way to provide some code generation from the command line. So for either bash scripting, or like a bash command line, but it also does extremely well with Z shell and etc. But also for Git or interaction with GitHub. And here the two capabilities are to generate commands from a human language. So if you ask it to do something, it's going to give you some command. But, and I think this is really, really cool, it also explains commands in human language. And someone in the chat wrote that these tools are very good to understand code, and that is absolutely true. So if you find some obscure bash command that you don't understand, you can plug it in there and it's going to explain everything to you in a very efficient fashion. So now, this playing with a little Julia script is might not be deadly, but this could be very bad if you don't know what you're doing. The command line is very powerful, and what code is going to be generated there could delete your data, entirely mess up your system, do a tremendous amount of damage. So treat it with a lot of caution. There is no safety guarantees there, so you have to know what you're doing. Don't make backups. Don't play around and lose all your data. Be very, very careful here. This is really cool, but also really dangerous. So how do you set this up? Well, this is an extension of GitHub CLI. So GitHub CLI is a command line tool that allows you to interact with GitHub from the command line. So this is free and open source. And this is actually really cool if you want to submit pull requests or manage your SSH key pair, like any kind of stuff you would normally have to do through the GitHub GUI. This tool, which replaces another tool that was unofficial and very popular, Hub. Like this is now an official GitHub command line tool. It allows you to do all of your GitHub stuff from the command line, and that's fantastic because that means that you can do things through scripts, you can automate things, you don't have to go poke around in the GitHub API, which I think is great. But now, in addition, you can have this Copilot add-on built onto it. So you need to install GitHub command line. Then you need to connect to your GitHub account. And then you need to install the Copilot add-on, and then you're set. You have 2 commands, and if you just run one of these, you're going to get a prompt, and then you can type some stuff to get outputs, or you can put arguments directly after those commands. So a few resources here, and it's time to play with these things a little bit. So as I mentioned, I'm gonna use Emacs, but the idea is the same in all the IDEs. And let's start maybe with some R script. So I am here in an empty text file called test.r. So that's an empty text script. And well, if I wanted to do some regular autocompletion or LSP autocompletion, I would have to launch an R process for this to work. Here, I don't even have to, because it's not based on the R process. It's just connected to the GitHub server and doing some AI-generated predictions. So in our course, when we teach R, for instance, I have a series on optimizations where I use the fizz buzz example, and that's a common example that's classic in programming. So of course the web is full of it. So it's no surprise that there's a lot of data on this already. But so the idea is to find a function that will generate a series from 1 to n, and whenever the number is divisible by 3 instead of the number you want to output fizz. If it's divisible by 5, you want to output buzz, and if it's divisible by 3 and 5, you want to have fizz buzz. So in this page, actually, let's link it in the chat in case you want to have a look. There are a number of functions that I have benchmarked to compare their performance. So now, how could I use Copilot here? Well, I could simply, instead of typing it, I'm going to paste it. I could type a comment, and in the comment, I'm going to describe what I want. So I wrote, write a function that outputs a series from 1 to n following the fizz buzz rules. Now, I need to launch Copilot mode because I don't want to have it running by default. So now it is on. In my setting, I have a key binding that triggers Copilot because I don't like having things pop up when I don't want them. So if I press that key now, there is a little delay because, of course, it has to talk to the server and etc. So now this is one suggestion I got. And it looks totally correct to me. And I can cycle through various suggestions. Well, those are not very exciting. When I tried it earlier, it was coming up with all sorts of more interesting ideas. Right now, I'm only getting a variation that has to do with the spelling of fizzbuzz. So that part is not very exciting. Earlier, it was suggesting me very many suggestions. So why it's working differently at different times, I am not sure. I am not, as you can see. And so from here, I can get out of there if I don't want the suggestion, or I can accept it all. So now I've accepted this whole thing, or I can accept the first line and then see if there are other variations, and I can accept it line by line, or I can accept it word by word. So it's very convenient, but yes, as you can see, I am not able to have much control over what's being generated because I tested it last night and I was having very many suggestions, and now I'm having just the one. That said, on the bright side of things, it still came up with something that is correct. It is not the fastest function, because after doing all sorts of benchmarking, I know that there is a way, way better, most efficient functions that skips the for loop and deals with it in a vectorized fashion. So this is not a very, very good suggestion, but it is a correct suggestion. Okay, now let's open a Julia script, for instance, and oh, absolutely, you can totally play with your command, and absolutely, you will notice that this command is very vague. I'm not being all that helpful, and absolutely, I could play with that, and because you don't have to accept the whole suggestion, you can accept part of it, you can accept a little bit, play with your command, and etc. Yeah, exactly. Just like all those LLMs running through chatbot, you can poke at it. Now, in Visual Studio and VS Code, because those are the Microsoft products that Copilot was initially built for, you have additional capabilities that you don't have in Emacs, Vim, and all the other things at this point. It might come. So in VS Code, you can actually chat about your code in a little chat window. And so you can prompt the model more easily, in a more convenient fashion than you would when you don't have this ability. So now I'm in a test.jl file. So I'm not even writing that this has to be in Julia. It's being deducted from the file name. So I could start typing a little bit, and then, oh, I need to turn Copilot mode, of course. And then if I trigger it, I also have a FizzBuzz function that is automatically generated. Right, yes, I have this in here, Control Enter opens a new tab in VS Code where you can see many options. Yeah. It worked very nicely in Emacs, but yes, VS Code, which this tool was initially built for, is ahead in its functionality. Absolutely. Okay, so let's try something different. In one of his courses, and I will pass the link in the chat, Alex is, and I will open it in this window, writing some Julia code to compute a Julia set. So I tried this also last night, and so in my Julia file, I can write a little comment that says compute Julia set, and then I can try some auto-completion, and this is what I am given as a suggestion. I don't know whether it is correct. Alex will have to tell us, but it seems somewhat reasonable. Oh, actually, we could try these things. If I go back to R, and if I launch an R server, it's a bit squished. Maybe let's put it this way. So this is my script here, and now I have an R process running. If I run this function, I'm not getting an error message, so that's good. And then if I, well, I can write it below. If I write please, buzz, and if I test it for instance, 100, if I run this, okay, I am getting 1, 2 fees for buzz, fees, 7, 8, yeah. So it seems to be working. But you absolutely can have some codes that isn't going to work, either because it is syntactically inaccurate or just gives you a totally wrong result. So yeah, you have to verify everything. Now, since we are running a little bit out of time, let's, I lost my window. Let's stop this for now, and I want to demo the command line tool. So, because I find this really cool, so I am referring to this section here. So the two commands are GitHub Copilot explain and GitHub Copilot suggest. And if you plan on using them a lot, of course, you could create aliases. So I have one alias that I've called CPE that stands for GitHub Copilot explain. And so again, you can put some arguments there, or you can just run it like that. And if so, you're going to have this little prompt where you can type things. So explain will explain some command into human world. So for instance, let's see what it thinks about this. So this is a for loop, but it is written in a C++ style. And so if it's something you're not familiar with, you might be wondering what it's about. So now it's contacted GitHub. And okay, so this is a for loop that iterates from 1 to 5. That's correct. The loop variable I is initiated to 1. Yes. The loop continues as long as I is less than or equal to 5. After each iteration, the loop variables I is incremented by 1 using I++. And of note, if you enter the same thing multiple times, you might get different things. As you can see, I'm getting something different here, and I don't see anything wrong in either case, but I am getting different things. So it is worth running it multiple times if you want multiple explanations. And indeed, this loop would iterate things from 1 to 5. And if I run it again, I might get yet a different explanation. And so let's actually run the command, and I am getting this. So yeah, let's try another one. So for instance, how about this thing? I have no idea what this means. Let's see. Okay, so kill is used to send signals to processes. With a -9 flag, it sends sig kill. PS awk lists all processes. XLS is a fuzzy finder, etc. Awk print to process the input onto second field. So this is all correct. Let's see for a second explanation. Yeah, and this is all correct. Indeed, if I run this command, I will have through FZF a list of the processes, and then if I provide the PID, which is on the second column, that allows me to send a sig kill signal to that process. So I'm not going to do it because I don't want to kill one of my processes, but if I were to type 30 enter, that would kill whatever process is there. Yeah. So the other command is Copilot suggest. So here again, I have a little alias. And so here, that's the other way around. You want to get some command from some human language. And this is where you have to be really careful, and things could be very dangerous. So first, you have to select between 3 categories. So GitHub command, that's a command from the GitHub command line. So that's the kind of command that you would use if you had to submit a pull request from the command line or do any kind of interacting with GitHub from the command line. Git commands, of course, Git commands, and generic shell. So let's go with generic shell. And I tried this morning to ask it, okay, rename all files matching a regular expression recursively. Oh, that's crazy. I tried it this morning and it gave me multiple solutions. Yeah, so go figure. It's like all generative AI, there's a statistical thing happening. So if you run it many times, you get different things each time. So now I'm getting a suggestion. So find, type F, name, old name, rename. That looks correct to me. So I can either copy the command to clipboard so that I can then use it, but I can also go to explain command, and then it's going to run GitHub Copilot explain and explain the various elements. And I can also revive the command. And I could, I don't know what I would type. I mean, I like the command, so I have no particular revision, but let's say give alternative command. Let's see. Okay, so I'm getting an alternative version. And if I copy to the clipboard, I can still get some explanation or some revision, so I can copy multiple versions as I'm interacting with Copilot. So this is in some ways much more similar to the chat that you have access to in VS Code. So if you use, because this of course is limited to the shell, you wouldn't be able to get any information about Python here. But if you use VS Code, as you're doing your auto-completion and code generation, you can open a chat and have some kind of exchange like that. And then you can exit that. So let's try another one. So in his Bash course, Alex has a number of exercises. And so I tried to run some of the exercises through Copilot. And so one was find all files in a directory hierarchy that have a matching substring inside and run ls-l on these files. So that's one of Alex's exercises. So let's see. Find that looks correct to me. Let's try it another one. Let's try another version. Very similar. Those are two different syntaxes, but both are correct. Okay, and then let's try. Okay, well, so let's try a simple one. So make file test.txt executable. So that's a very simple thing. Okay, change mode plus x test.txt. So that was easy, and we can get some explanation on the change mode plus x being executable. Well, the explanation is taking a while. Yeah, change permission to a file, allowing it to be executed, etc. So I find this really cool, but again, be very, very careful. And actually, I tested it on the Git command yesterday, and it gave me a totally wrong result. So be careful what you're doing. So let's see whether I'm getting a wrong reply here as well. So I did select Git command here. So how do I discard unstaged changes in Git? Let's see. Yeah, this one might actually be correct. The one it gave me yesterday was definitely wrong. But the point is, be really cautious. So, as I said, I'm not an expert in Copilot. Some of you have probably used it a lot more than me. So this is a bit of a naive first approach, but I wanted to give a first little poke at this. There were a lot of questions in the chat, so in the few minutes we have left, if you want to unmute and ask question out loud or chat, I will be happy to stay as long as needed and try to answer questions.